Hi, my name is David Breault. I am a recently graduated biology student from UNBC, and I really love fly fishing. I used to be into just regular fishing or spinner fishing, and that's where you use the classic kind of spinner reel. You kind of unlock the reel, you cast, and then you either have a float or some weights on it to get it down, and then you start reeling it in, and hopefully you catch a fish. Fly fishing is a little bit different. You use a different kind of reel, a different kind of rod. Generally, it's really fun on creeks, so sort of shallow. And I really love fishing on shallow creeks around town. So like the Crooked River, the Bowen River, the Willow. So these are rivers that a lot of the time aren't very deep. So if you used a more traditional spinner rod with weights or with a bob to keep it floating, you'd get snagged a lot on the rocks on the bottom. So fly fishing, especially dry flies, which I'll talk about in a little bit, are really useful for fishing these sort of fast-moving, shallow creeks. And some of the benefits of fly fishing are that it really gives you a sense of connection with nature. So rather than using a lot of gear, like a lot of flashy lures and things like that, you're really trying to simulate what the fish would naturally be feeding on in that river. So the dry flies I mentioned are flies like this simulator fly that are made from mostly fur. So we're talking about deer hair or elk hair, which has the properties of not absorbing much water. So it allows the fly to float on the surface. And this would be to simulate like a mayfly or a caddisfly, things that are hitting the water either to lay their eggs or just because they're having a bad day, and they hit the water and the fish will jump out of the water to eat them. So those are dry flies. And so you might get to the river and you look around and you might even have some flies land on you, and you kind of try to match the hatch. You try to match what you're fishing with to what is naturally there. And then you get into another class of flies, which I have here, which are called wet flies. And these are flies that are designed to sink and imitate little minnows or nymphs or aquatic larvae of those flies. So, all of these flies that you see buzzing around rivers and lakes, most of them have aquatic larvae forms. So these are what we call nymphs, and even leeches. So a really common one is this fly called a woolly bugger. And another thing about fly tying is a lot of flies have really weird names, like woolly bugger. And it's really just a sort of general wet fly that can be used to simulate sort of big bugs or minnows in the water. And like I said, with tying flies, you're using fur, thread, and feathers to create flies that look like naturally what would be there in the nature. Some benefits to tying your own flies are that you get to feel proud that you made something. They make great gifts for people, Christmas time and such, people that fish or just people that enjoy a good craft. And it gives you a connection to nature when you otherwise might not be able to get outdoors. So for me, when I can't get out fishing, like in the long winter months or these really rainy days of summer where I don't really want to go outside, I can feel like I'm thinking about the river and I'm thinking about fishing even when I'm not able to. So that's some of the biggest benefits to me about tying my own flies, is it gives me that connection to nature. And it's also social distancing safe. This is an activity that is very meditative. It's very individual. You can do it alone at home from a desk or a table, as long as you have the means. So I'll get into some of the tools that you'll need to get started. A great way to get started is to just ask a friend that you know who ties their own flies if they have some of the tools and materials that you would need to just figure out if it's something you want to invest in. Because once you start getting into it, it is definitely not, it is not more economically smart than just buying your own, because it is a craft, it is a hobby, and it will take over. So you'll end up just buying every bit of, tinsel and thread and feathers and fur that you can find, because you want to make that that next fly. So yeah, it can quickly become expensive. So before you really get into it, I would recommend either borrowing tools from a friend or buying just a beginner fly tying kit from like Canadian Tire or your local hardware store or sporting goods store. And you can find some of these online for $30 or so. And they'll have all of the tools, just kind of basic beginner tools, but it'll let you know if this is something you want to pursue. And you know, you can go your first year of tying flies with just beginner tools and you'll do fine. But the first thing you'll need is a vise. So this is used to secure the hook while you're tying, and usually they can clamp to most tables. So I'll just take it off. I have this little table I got from Value Village for $2 because you're not always guaranteed when you go to a friend's house or something like that that the table they have will work with your vise, because they only adjust so much. So you might want to get yourself a little tabletop for you to work on, but most of these can secure to any table. You'll need a bobbin. So this is what's called a bobbin, and it is what holds the thread while you're tying. So the thread goes in there and the thread comes out of there, and that's what you use to sort of spin on the thread. So bobbin. And these come in all shapes and forms and ranges of quality, from a couple bucks to, $50 or something like that for a really nice one. And then you'll need a pair of scissors that's dedicated for thread. So when you cut paper with scissors, it dulls the blade. So you want to have scissors that you're not going to use on paper, that you're only using to cut thread. And you end up cutting a lot of materials in fly tying. So you'll need to pick yourself up a good pair of little scissors there. And then to finish the fly, you need you can do it by hand by tying a certain kind of knot. It's called a whip finish. That's just the standard knot to tie off at the end so that all of your materials don't go floating down the river when you cast. But the easiest way to do a whip finish is with a whip finishing tool, or a finishing tool, aptly named. So this is mine, and I think I borrowed it from a friend because he wasn't using it, and I still have it now. And I've used all sorts of different kind of finishing tools, very much more expensive ones than this, but this is the one that I like. So you'll just have to experiment with them and figure out which ones you like. I really like this one, so it's my finishing tool. And then there's some sort of more extraneous, sort of optional tools. This is called a stacker, or a stacking tool. And what it does is it just stacks fur so that you can get a nice clean edge to your fur when you tie it in. And that gives you a more pretty or more realistic looking wing or tail on your fly. A little pair of tweezers. And this is especially important in British Columbia and Canada, because in most, I think all streams, you're legally required to take the barb out of your hook. So hooks generally commercially come with a barb to try to snag the fish. And what you want to do is you want to just clamp that down or crimp it. And then that basically makes that hook legal to fish with in BC. And it does make it more challenging to fish with, because the fish isn't just going to bite it and then not be able to get off. If you aren't careful, they will spit it out. And so for me, it makes it more challenging and a more competitive sport if you have that barb crimped. And then this, I think I just call it my pokey stabby. I know it has a name. I don't know what that name is, but it's basically just a long pointed needle, and it is useful for applying glue if you need to apply glue. You can buy actual fly tying glue or head cement, which is a specific type of hardening glue to secure things on a fly, but you can also just get this sort of nail polish hardener. This is Sally Hansen Hard as Nails hardener. And so this kind of pokey stabby can be useful for applying that kind of thing, and just for poking your materials around. And I don't know, at the moment I can't think of many applications for it, but I know I use it all the time. So that's one of those sort of all around, all purpose, kind of like tweezers or scissors. You just end up using them. And then this is another optional tool. These are called hackle pliers. So hackle is just this really long feathers. So they're taken from the neck of a rooster or another kind of pheasant bird. And they're really long, skinny feathers. And what these are used for is wrapping to get this sort of body on the fly to make it kind of look fluffier. So when you're winding it, just show you quickly here. So when you're winding it, you first tie it in, and then to wind it around, you would use the hackle pliers to sort of grab it, and then you can just let it dangle, and you can get a nice wrap around, and that's what creates that body on the fly. And I'll demonstrate that later, hopefully. Yeah, so that's basically it. And then I have this nice little alligator clamp for, again, just kind of multi-purpose clamping things down to get things out of the way while you're tying on another part of the fly. And that's it. Those are all the tools that I use. And like I said, in most beginner kits, it'll come with all of them. Maybe not the tweezers, but you can find those at any hardware store. And then so the next thing you'll need, other than tools, are the materials. So like I said, you're using the hook as the base. So you've got a hook, and these come in all shapes and forms. The two basic types of hooks, like I said, are either made for dry fly fishing. So these are lighter. These are designed to float on the surface and imitate those flying insects that get caught on the water. And wet fly hooks. So these are hooks that are a little heavier and designed to sink. And so those are the two types of hooks that you need. And like I said, they come in all sizes. Weird thing I know about hooks is that the bigger the size number, so these are size 14 hooks, the smaller they are. There's probably some reason for that, but like a size 14 hook is smaller than a size 8 hook. Who knows why? But yeah, the higher up you go in number, the smaller they get. And then you can have hooks that are either curved, like this one, or straight. So curved kind of hooks imitate the shape of a nymph, like larvae that, like a grub that curls over a little bit, that has that hunchback to it. And that's just designed to imitate the prey that you're trying to simulate. So, you get a hook on, and then you need thread to tie around that hook. Okay, so I've got a number 8 dry fly hook on there, and we're just going to tie a really general stimulator fly, and this is a dry fly pattern that's really appealing to all sorts of fish, but namely around here, rainbow trout in creeks, like the Crooked River, really enjoy this one. So I'm going to do an olive one because green is a very successful color to use for flies around Prince George, and I'm going to put it onto the bobbin first. And this was a trick that took a while for me to get down, but somebody taught me that a really helpful way is to just suck it up through there rather than try to feed it through, which takes a lot longer and isn't very effective. So once you've got your thread on your bobbin, you want to tie it on. So this is a pretty simple, just winding it around the hook, and you're doing a compression knot there. So you're actually winding the thread over itself to sort of compress it down. And another tool that you might want to get handy for this is a garbage can, because you will have a lot of tiny scraps of like thread and feathers and fur by the end of this, sort of everywhere. And if you have a cat, you'll want to make sure that they stay off your table, because these are all prime cat playing materials. And I have had many feathers wind up in all corners of the house because of my cat. So the next thing I'm going to do is use this elk hair. So this is just a natural elk hair. And like I said before, elk hair and deer hair is very buoyant, so it helps the fly to float on the surface. I'm going to use my stacker to just stack the hairs so that they all kind of line up, and then you get that nice pattern in the hair that comes through, because they're all lined up there. So you've got the light and then the dark. So I'm just going to put that on the end of it, and this is going to be our tail. So most mayflies, all mayflies actually have pretty long tails. Might actually be an ovipositor or something else It's not like for wagging like a dog or a cat, but they have a long sort of tail at the end, so you want to try to imitate that as best you can. And then just for some flash, we're going to add a little bit of sort of tinsel. So this is like a gold thread. And most fish respond to flashy colors in the water. It's just something they do. Not sure why, because this is sort of a color that is not common in nature, but it is common in a lot of flies. So we're going to tie this on, and this is just going to add a little bit of flash to our fly. So I'm tying that on parallel with the shank of the hook to sort of give it a little bit of structural support and just sort of hide it down there. The next part is called the dubbing. So this is it can either be synthetic or natural fur. And again, this is going to add a bit of body to the fly as well as some buoyancy. So this is going to add some air to the fly, and you can get different sort of oils and things to coat the fly to keep the water from penetrating, to keep it buoyant for longer. But we're just going to sort of wind that onto the thread like so. And there's different ways to do this, but this is the method I like to use. And then just wind that up the body or the shank, and this is going to create a thicker body that looks a little bit more buggy. And, you know, there's master tyers that their flies look like works of art. I haven't been tying for very long, so about 2 years now, on and off. And I pride myself on making flies that look buggy. So these are flies that maybe aren't super pretty, but bugs aren't super pretty. Oops. You know, bugs bugs aren't perfect. Nature isn't perfect. And so if we're trying to imitate nature, we're not trying to get perfection. We're just trying to get nature. So, you know, if there's some fur sticking out like that, or some of your wings are sort of at odd angles, or, you know, it's not perfectly symmetrical, I wouldn't worry too much about it, because nature isn't always perfectly symmetrical. Okay, so once we've got that dubbing on up to sort of behind the eye of the hook, and you want to leave some space there, some bare hook, because we don't want to end up tying over the eye of the hook, and then you can't get your fly line through the hook. And believe me, I have crowded or blocked the eyes of many hooks, and those flies are useless because now you can't actually get a fly line through it to fish with. So I'm not going to do that today, hopefully. So I've left some space there, and now I'm going to wind this tinsel up, and this is going to be something called ribbing. So it's sort of going to partition the dubbing so that it gives it a segmented appearance, like you would see in most insects, where their bodies are divided into segments and sections. And it's going to add that flash. Oops. And, you know, make mistakes and learn from your mistakes. So I'm winding up, and then I'm going to tie over it. So I'm going to try to pinch it down with my thread there. And again, all these little movements and things take time to get down, and you won't get it down on the first go, but over time it'll get smoother and smoother until it looks practiced and polished, and you won't really have to think about it too much. So now we have our basic body and tail, and what we want to do next is make that body sort of build that body out a little bit more. All right, so before we put on the rest of the body, I'm going to do the wing next. So I'm going to, again, use that same elk hair and going to cut a bit of a bigger clump, because the wing needs to be a little bit bigger. And this is where most of the buoyancy of the fly is going to come from. So this is what's going to allow it to float really, really well, especially if you put something on called floatant, which is that oil that I talked about, where it coats the fur and coats the fly so that the oil or the water doesn't get waterlogged. So we're going to insert the hair in tip down into the stacker. And you don't need a stacker for this, but it helps. And then you're going to give it a few taps on whatever surface you're working on. And that's just going to tap all the tips of all those hairs so that they all line up, again, really nicely, hopefully. And then you've got the pattern of each of those individual hairs is now sort of amplified by the fact that they're all lined up together. Okay, so we're going to just put that clump on top of the shank, and we're going to wind just loosely a couple times. And again, we don't want to block the eye, so we're going to go a little bit down from the eye of the hook and just do a couple of ties down, and you're going to see it kind of spread out. You know, there's different ways to sort of prevent that from happening, but right now we're not too worried about that. So I'm just going to tie that in, and then going to bend back the tips of that tie in front. And now we know that that's not going anywhere. And now I'm going to cut all of these ends off and just sort of pretty it up a little bit. Okay, so now we've got our wing, tail, body, and I'm just going to finish it up with a little bit of that hackle that I was talking about earlier. So this is these long, narrow hackle feathers, and we want to get one that is pretty narrow because we're not trying to cover up everything that we've just done. We want one that's going to give the fly a little bit of body, but not too much. So I've picked a small little one here. I'm just going to tear off the bottom of it, that sort of fluffy stuff at the bottom. So now we're just left with this sort of nice, narrow single feather. And I'm just going to secure that in right where that wing is with a few wraps of thread. And I'll cut the excess off here. And then I'm going to use those hackle pliers that I talked about and just grab the tip of that feather. And these break a lot because these are pretty narrow feathers, but we'll try not to break it. We won't spool it too much. And I'm just going to give it a few wraps at the front. And yeah, this just gives it a bit of shape and the appearance of a head. Oh, and look at that, the tip broke off. So that happens all the time because these are very small feathers. So you kind of have to be delicate. And you might find that this is easier without the pliers, that you just want to go with by hand, and that's totally acceptable. So we're going to, again, wrap the thread around that hackle a few times to make sure that it's down secured. And then we're going to wrap in front of it again to make sure that it's secured. And then what we can do is we can use the pliers to just sort of rip that tip off. And yeah, a few more wraps at the front will give it the appearance of a head. And we can always trim it up later to clean it up. And now we're going to do the whip finish. So again, this is something that takes a while to get down. So I'll just do it sort of a brief overview. So you kind of use your tool to splay the thread across the two ends of the tool, and then you flip it over. So you make like a 4. I don't know if you can see that, but it kind of looks like a triangle. And then you bring that tip of that 4 down to the hook, and then you wrap over. And again, this is just a compression knot to sort of secure everything down. And there are plenty of YouTube tutorials about how to do a whip finish, and I would highly recommend watching and practicing. So once you've got that whip finish, everything is secured, and you just want to bring your scissors to the hook and just cut it so that you don't have any sort of loose thread dangling. And then, yeah, you can just sort of finish up trimming up the head. And there you go. There's your sort of overall general stimulator fly. And this will work on rainbow trout, grayling, whitefish, and anything that likes to jump up and bite bugs that land on the surface. All right, so that's a basic dry fly. And so the other big class of flies is wet flies. And I just wanted to mention a few different flies that I find really useful around here in Prince George. I mentioned the woolly bugger. So this is a fly that just uses a few materials, kind of like the stimulator. It's just great for trout and whitefish. and it just uses a bead head. So at the head, there's it sort of weighs it down, and then chenille, which is just sort of like kind of like soft pipe cleaner material, and the hackle like before, and then some marabou feathers, which come in all different colors, but these are just really fluffy feathers that give it a nice tail. And once you've tied one of these, the variations are endless. So this is a woolly bugger, but it's tied to simulate a leech. So it's black, that is got an egg, like a salmon egg in its mouth. And again, I've never seen a leech with an egg in its mouth in nature, but on the end of a fly line, this works wonders, especially on like bull trout and rainbow trout when the salmon are spawning. And this is just a really big monster, red woolly bugger. Another wet fly that I really enjoy using is the rubber-legged stonefly, or the Kaufman stonefly. And this is a fly that is just to simulate the larval stage of a stonefly. So it's kind of this big predatory nymph that is usually kind of the biggest aquatic invertebrate in any river, that is sort of the top of the food chain when it comes to larvae. And this is another one that works really well around Prince George. And then the adult version of the stonefly is this guy. So I really, again, this is one that works really well around Prince George. These are to simulate adult stoneflies. So these are dry flies. So they're made with, again, those rubber legs that come in these bushels like this that are really fun. And then a foam body. So the foam is made from this material. It's just this foam that I think is just special for fly tying. You can get this online probably. And yeah, you just kind of cut the foam out of strips of these and tie it down to give it that sort of segmented appearance. And then, yeah, like the stonefly, the rubber leg stonefly is again very changeable, very adaptable to any kind of color or size that you want to use. And these are just wet flies that are supposed to simulate nymphs and larvae in the water. So the simulator with all different colors and different kinds of fur and feather, you can use the same techniques, the same pattern to get an infinite variety of flies. And I would also recommend, if you're getting into it or at any stage in tying flies, to pick yourself up a fly tying book with just make sure that it just has pictures and detailed diagrams of what the materials are that you want to use, what fish you're trying to attract, and so on. And again, you can use any book, but I like this one. It's called the Fly Tying Bible, and I think it's $25-$30 online. And it's got essentially any fly you would ever want to tie. So it's got all the ones we use today that I've shown you, and many, many, many more. And this could serve you for a lifetime, but you will inevitably end up turning to YouTube as well, and your friends and people that you know, to ask, like, what's working on the rivers around here. Another really good resource to find out what works around here is princegeorgeflyfisher.com or princegeorgeflyfishing.com. That is a website that's made by a local fly fisher in Prince George, and it's got detailed information about the rivers and what works and at what times of year. And so you can have sort of a goal when you're tying of, okay, I want to go fish the Crooked in June. So what works on the Crooked River in June? And then you go online and you say, oh, olive stimulator flies, or, what have you. And so, yeah, once you've got the basic tools, a book, and you can just turn to online resources to help you through. So hopefully all of you have enjoyed this little tutorial, and you get out there and fish and tie from the safety of your home.